Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Union Federation podcast here on both the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN Network. I'd like to thank you for joining us. If you're watching via our Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel, we got a great episode for you. We're going to be talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, episode 3 of season 2, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and a lot of tomorrows. But I cannot pilot the Union Federation without an excellent crew, and I've got a great one lined up here. Of course, as always, our top-notch security officer, and this week too, I'm letting him play ship counselor, which I could end badly or really well. We haven't decided yet, but he, of course, is the co-founder of the Fandom Podcast Network and my brother from another mother, Mr. Kevin Reitzel.
Good to be back. I just beamed up hustling some street chess. So I'm back here to help you out here with Union Federation Starship.
You know you're copping out easy when you play that 2D stuff. Come on now.
It's true. I'm not very good at street chess. Checkers is more my thing. So
well, Chinese checkers, right? But you know what? Amy is out on a special assignment. Haley has been stuck back at Starbase for some past due mission reports. So they are both off doing the thing, but do not worry because we have a very special guest joining us. He is one of the newest members of the BQN network, our good friend, Laz Marques. Laz, welcome to the Union Federation podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Welcome.
I beamed down stealing from Kevin. I decided I really wanted some hot dogs this week.
No, who can blame you? A good
street dogs.
Yeah.
Even in Toronto.
I'm from New York, so like if you can get a street dog, that's good. I'm okay by it.
Well, Laz, this is your first time not only on the Union Federation, but the Fandom Podcast Network. And again, we thank you for coming over. We love our friends over at BQN. But tell us a little bit about your history with Star Trek and your Star Trek fandom.
Yeah, of course. Thank you again for having me. In terms of my Star Trek fandom, I've been a fan since I was as young as I can remember watching anything. Star Trek The Next Generation was my thing. I grew up on it and I just adored it and stuck with the, fandom and the genre moving forward. And I continued that love into working in entertainment, creating artwork for multiple studios like Sony Pictures, Warner Brothers, and recently Star Trek Picard, doing some on-screen illustrations for the some day that was very important during that series.
So you had to keep secrets for a while.
Oh, for at least 2 years, yes. But I was very grateful because it was like my wish in life. And also my mom, who passed away of breast cancer, her dying wish. She was like, "You better get on Star Trek." And I was like, "I will, Mom." And I did. So what?
That is awesome. But let me ask you, since we have you here and we're talking the Strange New Worlds, what have your thoughts been on the most recent addition to Star Trek Strange New Worlds?
I think it's incredible. I think going back to basics in a certain sense has been really lovely for this show. I think the way that they're honoring the legacies and also creating new aspects within that has been incredible to witness. I love how they're, playing with expectations as well with some of the characters has been rock solid. So I'm in for the ride, just like all those characters seem to be.
I have been so happy with Strange New World. It actually reignited a lot of my love for Trek. It's been kind of a mixed bag for me personally with the new Trek. I love Lower Decks. Discovery's been kind of a mixed bag. I think Picard, this last season was phenomenal. I think Picard had even been a little up and down, but this has just been so much fun and so great. So we are glad to have you here to talk about it because we are going to be talking Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 3 tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, which means, of course, too, gentlemen, spoiler alerts ahead. We will be doing the deep dive into this latest episode of Strange New Worlds. So if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, go watch it. come rejoin us on YouTube or pause your podcast and then come back, listen to our thoughts, and as we give some spoilers and some of our deep thoughts on the very interesting episode of Strange New Worlds. But to do that, Kevin, that means we're going to have to talk about it. So I'm going to activate our warp drive so we can get into our episode synopsis of this episode. Mr. Rice, your extra duties this ship's counselor means you also get to give us the Admiral Logs episode synopsis.
Of course, more than happy to do so. All right. La'an encounters a mysterious man with a gunshot wound. He hands her a time travel device, instructs her to, quote, get to the bridge, then dies. On the bridge of the Enterprise, the ship is captained by James T. Kirk. In a timeline where Earth was ravaged by war, there is no Federation, Vulcan is about to fall to the Romulans, and humanity is also under Romulan threat. The device transports La'an and Kirk to 2020's Toronto when a Toronto bridge explodes. She and Kirk both recall the bombing, and La'an recognizes damage caused by the 23rd century technology. While they search for the real point of divergence, they form a romantic bond. After consulting with Palia in Vermont, they find the bomber Sarah in a eugenics lab about to kill the child Khan Noonien Singh. Sarah's disguised as a Romulan time travel intent on changing human history by preventing the eugenics wars, which had set humanity on a path to unity and federation. Sarah kills alternate Kirk, and a brief hand-to-hand fight ends with La'an killing Sarah, saving Khan and restoring the timeline. La'an returns to the Enterprise, where a time-traveling investigator from the future arrives, confiscates the time travel device, and swears her to secrecy. La'an chats with her timeline's Lieutenant Kirk, then breaks down in despair over the loss of her Captain Kirk. The end.
So there's a lot going on in this episode as far as things added, some emotional weight to this. So, gentlemen, let's get our first reactions to this episode. And Laz, as our guest, we would like to start with you and have you give your first impression. What were your first reactions after this episode ended?
Yeah. So after seeing this episode for the first time last night, right after watching Indiana Jones, so two, time travel oriented stories, I wasn't really sure how to feel about it. La'an and Kirk are not necessarily like my favorite characters to follow, but I think that they did them justice. So it was interesting to be in on the ride. I think I personally just missed some of the other folks within the cast. I'll leave it at that until we get deeper into the episode.
Interesting point. Mr. Wright, so what about you? What were your first reactions to this episode?
It's interesting because I'm like, okay, I wasn't really, we're still learning a lot about the cast members. And the first season, you got a little taste of most of them, but La'an is still kind of a mystery. So I'm glad that we kind of got a La'an episode, so to speak, in this. And we got to learn a little bit more about her. And I feel like we are learning that. And I'm always been a fan of Star Trek time travel episodes. Most of them are done pretty well. I was a little disappointed with the second season of Star Trek Picard. But, when you go back to, those 2-part episodes in Next Gen or DS9 or Voyager, they're usually done pretty well and they're a lot of fun. And, but you do notice the absence of the rest of the Strange New Worlds cast in this one. And I remember learning that Anson Mount was not in the first episode because he and his wife were having a baby, and there might have been some COVID restrictions as well during that time that were still in place, because I know Canada has a little bit stricter settings when it comes to that. So I'm wondering if like this episode was actually maybe the second episode that was shot. That's what I started thinking when I learned about Anson Mount not being around for the first episode that much, because they were trying to work around his schedule of availability. So I felt like maybe this one, even though it's the third episode, it might have been the second episode. And then the one that we saw last week might have been the third one they shot, because they got Anson back for most of that. So that's what's kind of what's going through my mind. But overall, I enjoyed it. But I was kind of trying to figure out this Kirk a little bit more, and how it was being portrayed. And I'll go into that a little bit more later, because I've got some thoughts about that. What about you, Kyle?
I enjoyed this episode. Star Trek time travel, to me, I'm with you, Kevin. Sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it's a little rough. And I'm gonna be honest with you. Modern Trek really hasn't hit time travel very well yet. It's been a huge piece of the modern Trek shows. So I was a little, I'm not sure with this episode. Also, when you add in the fact that we have Paul Wesley as Kirk, and I have feelings about him as Kirk as well, my excitement level wasn't high for this particular episode, seeing the footage from the Ready Room in the previous week. But there's some things I really liked about this episode. I think there's some great character building in this episode. And I think I actually enjoyed some of the aspects of the time travel here. And I actually am very intrigued about some of the things they have set up, because I think we are not done with time travel in this season. And the reason why I say that is we do know we have a Lower Decks crossover, and obviously Lower Decks takes place in a different time than Strange New Worlds. So could we have some more temporal anomalies or whatever going on? It's going to be very interesting to see how this is going to play out over the next few episodes and what directions they decide to take Strange New Worlds in. But guys, too, we didn't have a lot of the cast in this episode, but it was a little bit more than Leon and Kirk in this episode. So was there anybody else within the cast that may have stood out to you in their brief moments, Kevin?
I'm sorry. I'm forgetting her name right now. The actress, the famous actress they had that was also
Carol Kane.
Yeah, Carol Kane. So she was kind of thrown in on the what was it, the first episode of this season, right? Mm-hmm. Mysterious character. I don't remember the name of her species, but apparently they live for over 1,000 years. Am I remembering this right?
Yeah, they have a very, very long lifespan. Yes,
which kind of makes them immortally, like Highlandery.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're similar to like Alorians.
Okay,
I have like a qualm about, but
yeah, that makes sense. So I'm trying to figure out what her character is, and you see in the beginning of this episode, she's got all kinds of stuff in her quarters, and then when they go back in time, they search her out for some help and some information. I like Carol Kane, but her character, I'm still kind of like, why? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one. I don't know about that. But like I said, there's not much other cast members that we can kind of hang a hat on here, because there's pretty only two main characters in this particular episode. So that's what I was thinking regarding the cast so far, Kyle.
What about you, Laz? What did anybody pop out even for a moment or anything in this week?
I'm very much in Kevin's camp here. There's not a lot to like reach into in terms of the rest of the cast. I think Spock's moment where he's like, playing his instrument, and like they make that joke of him like being like, okay, I will like, not play as loudly, and I think that was lovely because Ethan Peck is awesome. But outside of that, I would agree with Kevin with Carol Kane's character. It's been difficult, even because I watch with my partner, so we watch it often, and it's like we want to really like her, but there's something off about like something, and I don't know if it's purposeful or if it's not. So it's hard to get down to the roots of it. Outside of that, we really only have La'an and Kirk.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And as far as the Carol Kane thing, I just weigh in this real quick. I don't even know if it's the character. It's Carol, maybe even Carol Kane herself. She's a phenomenal actress. She's a legend, but she just feels out of place with the rest of the cast. And I don't know if it's just how she carries herself, what they're doing with this character. Maybe when we see later on some more of it, but I think it feels like more Carol Kane herself is like, why is she here? It's like it's that old thing. One of these things is not like the other. And
I keep waiting for her to go, it's a toaster. A Scrooge reference there.
But I do have to give a quick shout out to her in this episode, but she was giving some great side eye look. Like, who are you? Thinking that was just a great little moment on the bridge there. But I agree with you guys. I mean, obviously it was a lack of characters in this episode, but yeah, Carol Kane. We'll see where it goes. It's just something still doesn't feel quite in place. But with
I
that,
think
guys,
part of it might be that like accent. I think
her voice.
Yeah, like it's hard to like digest in a certain way, which again could be purposeful, and I'm cool with that. But it might take some time to get used to.
I completely agree. But guys, with that, it's time. I'm going to activate our transporter and beam us into our first away mission. And of course, we are here with our away missions. Our first set of away missions usually takes us more into some of the plot points of the episode. And guys, the first one that I have is time travel in Star Trek. We got some time travel and madness with time travel in Star Trek. I'm curious because we have had so many different iterations of time travel in Star Trek, whether it's Discovery going into the future, everything that happened with the Time Wars and Enterprise, things with the other Star Trek shows. How do you feel this particular episode of Star Trek handled time travel within the Star Trek universe? And Kevin, I'm going to actually start with you on this because I know you're a huge fan of the time travel episodes in Trek.
You know, it's interesting. I've always liked how most of the shows and episodes have handled it. But the thing that I get really weird about is when you go too far into the future. When you go to the past, it's safer. It's also more fun because we as humans liked the references that we see. But when you go into the far future, like Discovery did, I thought that was kind of jumping the shark, going that far into the future and then painting this dystopian, horrible time that the Federation is heading towards. Burn, whatever you want to call it. And then it was also in Enterprise. Was it Enterprise or was it an episode of I think it was Enterprise. I can't remember. Maybe it was that one episode of Voyager where they went really far into the future, but they didn't like tease too much of it. I know they brought back some technology to help the Doctor have the mobile emitter and stuff like that, but they didn't tease too much of what was going to happen. So thus I was thinking in my head canon that there's a lot of stuff that Star Trek can cover without having to be shoehorned into this future that they're putting. And that's what I don't like about what they did with Discovery. I felt like they shoehorned into this horrible future that's going to be happening. Yeah. Now, with this, though, I liked how they go back into time, back in time to the 2020s. And what I did like about it was that, yes, it's during our time, which I always love because I love seeing no matter what Star Trek cast is, I love seeing it during our time. Just like when we were watching Star Trek for the one with the whales, you know, it was during our time, that time, and we loved it and we still love it. But I liked that they did it. And I also liked that they did it in Toronto. They didn't film it in Toronto as New York because Toronto's a great town. I've been there several times. I love it. I miss it. And I think that so many companies, TV and movie production companies, use Toronto as other major metropolitan cities like New York. Like I think Suits does that, right, Kyle?
Yeah.
Suits takes place in New York, but they film it in Toronto. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that they mentioned poutine. I think that was great too.
Well, didn't they also make the joke of like, is this New York? And it's like, no, it's not. It's Toronto.
Yeah, he says it's Times Square. They think they're in Times Square.
Yeah. So I like that. I think that was cool. So the way they handled the time travel, I liked it, especially with the ties to Khan. Very interesting situation where like there's Khan, who is like Kirk's future nemesis, and you know, another world war is wrapped around what he does. And you're in that situation where if you go back in time, do you kill a Hitler baby? There was that little moment right there I thought was interesting. So yeah.
What about you, Laz? How do you feel they handled the time travel in this episode?
I think it's interesting hearing Kevin speak about it first, because I'm kind of in my own, personal bubble, and I think we often do that when watching, an episode. But like for me, my point of reference and my favorite time travel episode is yesterday's Enterprise from TNG, where I think that character who was not serviced well and like didn't have a lot of, I would say, like emotional value, at least given from the writers or anything similar, I think, to La'an, because I don't really connect with her. So I was watching it through that lens and thinking, I don't know how I feel about this, because I think Tasha Yar may have had a better arc in one episode than somebody who dealt with it in this episode. But that, again, is me personally. But again, hearing Kevin speak about it and like what she's tasked with within this episode of like, do I kill, somebody who is affecting me in my life, but also could be somebody who impacts the future. So it's a very difficult conversation, but it's also a very familiar one in Trek. So I think it can go either way for me.
Those are both fair points. I think I liked how they handled in this episode, because I think they handled it with a serious nature, but they had some fun with it as well. And I think that's a key thing when you're going to do a time travel story, especially when you're going from the future to the past, is to have a little fun with it. And I'll be honest with you, I think that was one of the things that was missing with Star Trek Picard season 2, is they didn't really have fun with their time travel, except for maybe a moment here or there. With this, you have what I was very fascinated by too, was the understanding uh, that La'an had of the time frame too, and I think that made it more interesting. Help that, because she had such an understanding of it, and also you have this different Kirk who has a totally different perspective, because he's never actually been on Earth in his timeline, and I think that that made it even more interesting, which makes me even more curious as how he knew how to drive a car. But that's a whole other issue. But I think they had fun with it, and I think they did it in a very smart way, and I think that they also did a good job of it by incorporating this new Federation time travel, whatever they're going to be. And I think they're playing a key part of it, because I found it very interesting, and I think it's poignant, and I think it's something we need to remember. That final shot where they pan out and everything's blurred, but that watch. And I think there's going to be more to that as we go forward. But Kevin, you have some additional thoughts you want to add in?
When you're talking about how Kirk was able to figure out driving a car pretty quickly, I was laughing because if this Kirk had grown up in Iowa, what we learned from Star Trek 2009 is he stole cars at a young age. But I was doing a quick search on Star Trek's best time travel episodes, and yesterday's Enterprise and was it City on the Edge of Forever,
Yep.
were some of the top ones there. And Time's Arrow is one of my favorites too. But they get into like Little Green Men and Trials and Tribulation. Was it Trials and Tribulations from DS9?
Yep.
A lot of those classic ones.
Well, since we were talking about Kirk and Iowa, I think that leads us into perfectly the second part of this particular away mission. Kirk, we hardly knew you. Paul Wesley making another appearance as James T. Kirk, but in this episode, much like his biggest, I'll stop and think about this. For the most of we've seen of Kirk in Strange New Worlds, it's an alternate timeline version of Kirk we've seen. You know, whether it was in the season finale with Pike and him trying to go through different timelines to try and save himself, to this episode where we have an alternate timeline of version of Kirk again. I want to say this to get this out there, and then let you guys give your thoughts on Paul Wesley. I actually liked him and how he was in this episode, but it still didn't quite feel like Kirk either. And I'm like, I liked his character. It's just, can he not be Kirk and be somebody else? Because I think more people would like him that way. I think a lot of people have had issues with Paul Wesley's portrayal of Kirk to this point. And let's be honest, whether it's fair or not, he has big shoes to fill not only William Shatner, but Chris Pine as well. And so I'm going to ask you guys, and Laz, I'll go to you. What have been your thoughts on Paul Wesley as Kirk so far in Strange New Worlds, and in particular this episode?
So I'll start with this as a preface. I'm not a huge James T. Kirk fan in general, like as a character, not like the actors who've portrayed him or anything like that. He doesn't work for me as like a captain and how he's been portrayed. This episode, I think, validated that for me in terms of Paul Wesley, like just like the other actors that have done the work to portray this character. I think he's doing a fine job. But for me, it's more about like the narrative and like what he represents versus the actor himself. I just don't like the character personally.
Well, I think that's fair, because we all have our favorite captains, and there's people who love William Shatner, there's people who can't stand William Shatner. So, but I can get where you're coming from.
Like I'll give him some credit here. Like he apparently plays chess really well, and he can afford like a $bazillion hotel room for 2 people and cab rides from Toronto to Vermont very easily. So like, good on him.
Kevin, what are your thoughts on Paul Wesley's performance as Kirk, and especially in this episode?
I wanted to give a quick little backstory on my thoughts on Kirk overall. I like Shatner. I've always been a fan of his portrayal. But what's interesting though is as much as I've seen all the episodes of the original Trek. I grew up watching my mom watch them, so I knew who Captain Kirk was. But I got into Star Trek first when the movies were coming out. And I actually prefer the movie Shatner more than the TV show Shatner. I think Kirk or Shatner I just like his portrayal of Kirk in the movies more than the TV series, personally, for me. And so I've always liked that. And plus, I was a fan of the Shatnerverse novels that he did. That was co-written or ghost-written by a couple other people, and he did the voiceover for, when you saw Kirk die in Generations, and then he co-authored the series that came after those, of how his body came back to animation with the help of Borg technology and the Romulans, and then he was able to break free with that and then live another second life as Kirk. And as cheesy as those were, I loved him. But I loved Chris Pine's portrayal of Kirk as well. And so going into this, especially after what Mark White was saying last week about his feelings for Paul Wesley's portrayal, which were not favorable, I was trying not to let that skew my opinion on Paul, because I've just seen the little teases here and there. And then I watched the episode, and then I watched the Ready Room, and then his thoughts on how he approached the character, where he said that he wasn't trying to do an imitation, he was trying to do an interpretation of Kirk. And so when I rewatched the episode, I was keeping that in mind. And I thought he was okay. He was enjoyable. There was moments that I really liked. But what's interesting, when you look for the Kirk aspects of taking charge and I'm throwing out the womanizer part thing because that got kind of toned down more in the the movies, but I felt as a leader, it was La'an that really was kind of playing the Kirk role here. She was taking charge. She was the one that felt like she was running point. Yes, she is part of the main cast, and she's one of the cast members, and this is kind of her episode. But to me, I'm kind of thinking that this version of Kirk is still kind of coming into his own, that we would see later on as the ideal Kirk, the Kirk captain that we get after, a lot more turns or years on the Enterprise. But then I also had to think, wait a minute, this isn't the Kirk that we know. This isn't the one that grew up in Iowa. So that was kind of weird. This guy grew up in space, so that maybe changes him a little bit. So I had to keep that in mind. So it was kind of more of a toned down version of Kirk. And after I kept all of and thought about all of those aspects of what was going into this story, realized he did all right.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point that you just brought up, Kevin, about it being a different Kirk. It's a Kirk with totally different experiences than the James T. Kirk of main Star Trek that we're used to. And that was one of the things that I actually liked about Paul Wesley's performance, was that it was a bit of a different Kirk. Yes, some of the personality elements were there, but it was through a different lens. And I think that's what it works. And that's what they kind of seem to be doing with Wesley for the moment right now, is in his portrayal of Kirk, is they're Kirks from different timelines. They're Kirks from different, they're setting him up as Kirks that haven't had the same experiences as the James T. Kirk we know. And so I think they're kind of using that as a tool to kind of work around some things. It will be curious to me as we go on, and if they incorporate more of Kirk into Strange New Worlds in the Prime timeline, how that's going to end up playing out. So I think it's a little bit of an experiment, but I think it's also, you're kind of working with a little bit of a safety net, portraying Kirk how they've done so far. But that's just my thought.
So at risk of being controversial here, do you guys feel like Kirk came off competent as somebody who's a leader in this episode?
I have a thought on that. I see where you're going at with this, because when she first sees him, he's obviously on the bridge of the Enterprise. I think so, because he's willing to listen to her and take her for her word. And
not initially.
Not initially, but eventually he does. And, he teaches a little bit of street smarts as well, with the hot dog and doing the car and all that kind of stuff. But also, too, as a leader, he took the bullet as well. And I think that says a lot. So yes, to answer, I would say yes. Maybe not in the way I would have probably wrote it, but that's okay. But I thought he did. So
see, I think the self-sacrifice, and I'm sorry, I'm not taking anything away from like what you took from it, but I felt like it was accidental that he got shot. Like he was trying to call a bluff. He wasn't expecting to be shot, or didn't play the martyr.
That's possible. Yeah.
So like, again, like I struggled with that the first time that I saw it. I was like, I don't know. Like, how are they portraying Kirk, even in better light for La'an's, love for him, kind of moving forward. And this is, again, coming from somebody who's not like a Kirk aficionado. So
I think to both of your points, as far as him getting shot and being a sacrificial thing, I think when you are in that position and you take the risk of calling somebody's bluff, you know how it can play out. Yeah, you have high, but you still have to take that chance. And to step up and take that chance, whether you think it's actually going to go through or not, is a sign of leadership. I think it's a different kind of leadership for Kirk, because he learned to adapt. And that's something like La'an, she hasn't, because of what she's been through and what she's experienced, she's so hardened that adapting for her is a very difficult thing. And I think Kirk, through his own personality, not only did he adapt, but he helped La'an adapt and open up a little bit and put her in a comfort zone. And that's a sign of leadership too. It's a different type of leadership, but when you put your fellow crewmen or members of your team at ease into a point where they can let their guard down. You're leading by there as well, and I think that's an important point. And Kevin, like you said too, I think the other thing is again different experiences. This Kirk has been through an entirely different experience, growing up in space, never really getting to experience Earth, only seeing Earth in a tragic sense.
I have a feeling though that this Kirk didn't rig the Kobayashi Maru.
Yeah, I don't think so. And as far as the point of Kirk and Leanne and their relationship, this harkens back to Geordi and his holographic love affair, where when he meets the real person, she's nothing like what he was expecting her to be. So I think that's going to be an interesting story to play out, because they're going to play it out at some point, probably during this season.
See, I didn't need that.
Yeah,
like you could have two independent characters without a romance. Like I get it, it's Kirk. He's like a womanizer, to a certain extent, no matter what timeline. But I didn't need a love story that wasn't, for me at least, earned in this episode. And again, I'm coming from like an episode last week that was very nuanced and really well written and like super deep, to this where it's like, okay, you're playing by the books, so to speak. So like I didn't need the love story. I didn't like it in yesterday's Enterprise, even though I love that episode. Like we didn't need Tasha Yar to fall in love with someone to like make a sacrifice. Like, come on, no mas.
I get it, and I get where you're coming from too, as far as the relationship not being earned. I think it's coming from a point though too, where you have two people who are going through a very interesting emotional time, so I think you play that into it a little bit. But
I'm the romantic at heart. Give me the love scenes. Give me the love triangle. Give me the love interest somewhere. It complicates things. I love that.
You're reading me wrong, Kevin. I love romance. I'm like a super sappy person. I'll cry at a dime if it's earned.
Yeah. I like that Tasha Yar thing. I like the moment that Lon and Kirk had, and the little kiss they had.
It was nice, but like, is it really like it's fleeting? It's like fleeting emotional,
for me, what it does, maybe it doesn't click at the moment, but what it does is it settles with the character, as we saw how it affected Lon later in the episode, talking to Lieutenant Kirk, and the moment that she had with her Kirk, and also, how a moment of romantic interlude or what have you, it's more about how it affects the characters later on and what happens because of it,
which normally I would agree with, but then there's the implications of I'll be that person canon, like really like the Noonien Singh and like Kirk romance. Like, do we need that? I don't know. Like it's kind of like on the nose a little bit, but
and there could be nothing that comes of it coming, but there could also be nothing that comes of it going forward too. That she might, it might. So I think it's one of those things. I want to see more of how it's going to play out. I think that's the kind of thing. But speaking of Lon, she was carrying the weight in this episode. She was doing all the heavy lifting, and it was a very powerful episode for her. And really, and as Kevin said earlier, a big enlightenment into her character, which is, I talked about this last week with Una, where we haven't really had a lot of character development with Una. We've had a little bit more with Lon, but not. This is really kind of starting to see into her emotional side and how she ticks and the struggles she's been going through, not only with her experiences as a child through the Gorn, but also having to deal with her family name and what that means for her. So, Kevin, I'll let you kick this off. What were your thoughts of what we learned this week about our Lon and how that played out?
This is actually where I'm still a little confused with her character. Even though I'm liking more of what I see from her in this episode, her past, I'm still a little blotchy for me, because I didn't go back and rewatch the first season of Strange New Worlds, so I don't remember all of the details and how people knew about her lineage, who she's, like, is she like a distant cousin of Khan? I'm asking because I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't know if they've actually clarified just exactly what the relationship is.
I think it's heritage.
Yeah.
In general.
Okay. The reason why I ask is because she's carrying this obvious burden, and it is in her facial expressions. It's in her actions and her everything. But I feel like we don't quite have, whether it's through flashbacks of the struggle that she has been. She's mentioned things from time to time, and Una being kind of part of that, knowing what's going on. But I feel like this is a really slow drip, and I'd like to see a little bit more of why it's so hard to live with that name. They've given us a good tease, but where we're at right now, especially in this episode when she's, sitting next to the young Khan and what is to become, I'd like to know. I want to see her at that age and how it's affected her then growing forward a little bit. So maybe that'll come to light more going forward. But I just need a little bit more of that to understand more of what she's going through. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I think that's a good point. Laz, what were your feelings on this?
I think again, coming off of last episode, we're dealing with another species that is enhanced, and like we have such a deep conversation and like jury and rich script writing and acting. It's hard to come off of that and then do another story that evokes that to a certain extent, because it almost undermines it to a little bit of a, in a little bit of a way where it's like La'an and Una do share a lot of similarities, but so close together in those narratives, it lost a little bit of that importance and that emotional resonance that I was hoping for. So, like, again, like I said at the top, La'an is somebody that I would love to learn more about. And I think Kevin spoke about it beautifully in terms of why we should. But like, I'm not sure that the placement of the episodes were proper for this one.
I think those are all very good points, and I think she is one of the characters who really has a lot more character developed to do and to make that character even more enriched. I'll be curious to see, because we know we've got Gorn coming up later, and that's obviously she's very tied in with that as well. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out. But with that, guys, I want to just give you a chance, open forum here before we transport into the second away mission. Is there any other points that you want to bring up on some of the plot topics that maybe we haven't discussed or covered? Laz?
I think we've covered most of it. I will say yay for representing Toronto properly. That's awesome. So I'll leave it at that.
Kevin, what about you?
The timey-wimey people. They seem to kind of drop in and drop out. This kind of reminds me of when we first got introduced to Section 31 in Deep Space Nine. Mm-hmm. Do you just drop in the I'm just going to call them timey-wimey, time temporal, whatever you want to call
the
them.
Department of Temporal Investigations.
AKA timey-wimey people. That's what I'm going to say. So
can we just use that moving forward, please?
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So the timey-wimey people. Is this a tease of what's to come? Because we've been without Anson for a little bit because he's on, baby maternal leave and they had to shoot around his schedule. I'm kind of curious of where the season's going now. As much as I love the episodic thing going on, usually there's
like a through line,
yeah, something to kind of go. So that's where I'm at right now. It's not a bad thing, but I'm asking, like, okay, this because we get, obviously, at the end of last season, we got the whole Una thing, and we went through that, right? But that was done more in the second episode, not the first. And usually the first episode kind of lays some eggs.
Yeah.
And then the first few episodes were kind of warm those eggs up, and we're doing the separate missions here for Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And then stuff kind of pops out of those, and then we kind of continue and stuff. So I'm just kind of curious if the timey-wimey people are going to return, and if this is going to be a continuing thread like we saw in Star Trek Enterprise or in Deep Space Nine with Section 31. And Section 31, as we know, Kyle, we're not really excited about Section 31 anymore because we've seen it in the Kelvin timeline. We're going to get a movie now instead of a TV series with Michelle Yeoh. But this is the timey-wimey people. I wouldn't mind going back and visiting the timey-wimey people with more stuff with Strange New Worlds. That'd be kind of fun.
I think we are. I think they're going to be playing a part of the season as one of those through lines, because I think I have some theories of how they're going to make Strange New Worlds seasons last, so they don't get into a timeline crunch problem that the show is going to have at some point. But I think could be some of the ways they figure out a workaround. But yeah, I think that we are not done with timey-wimey by any stretch of the imagination. Strange New World.
I just wanted you to say it again.
Trademark David Tennant. Okay, guys, let's kick off the transporter and dive into our second away mission. It is away mission 2, which means it's time for some Star Trek trivia and Easter eggs. And we've got some fun ones from this episode. Mr. Reitzel, would you care to share with some trivia with us?
Sure. Kirk mispronounces La'an's name as Noonien Soong. Dr. Noonien Soong is the cyberneticist who created Data and Lore and B4 in Star Trek Next Generation 1987. Basically, it's what fans been doing for years. So I got that. So I don't know if that was a nod to that, because it was brilliant. So, and we will continue to mispronounce it. So. In this timeline where Kirk is not born on Earth, but on the starship, the USS Iowa, saw what they did there, Kirk explains the line, "I am from space." This echoes Kirk's line from Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. "No, I'm from Iowa. I only work in outer space." So interesting. Like that.
A great tribute to that line. But we had some interesting Easter eggs as well. Kevin, we'll split these up with me. I'll start it off. The Denobulan cadet. At the beginning of the episode, we see a Denobulan cadet arguing with La'an. The Denobulans were an alien race made famous by Dr. Phlox in the prequel series Enterprise. This is the first time a Denobulan has appeared in a live-action Star Trek series outside of Enterprise, though we have seen Denobulans in the animated shows Lower Decks and Prodigy. I like this because I like how this season of Strange New Worlds has been incorporating a lot more little pieces from Enterprise and giving Enterprise some love and some acknowledgement in this.
I think that's important because this series is closer to that timeline, even though that was like 100 years ago. I like that because I think Enterprise deserves a lot more attention, a lot more love than it got. Only fortunately got 4 seasons. I wish it would gotten more. So I like that, and I liked Phlox in that series as well. So I thought that was a cool shout out.
Should we make a t-shirt for you? I like Phlox.
There we go. Kevin, Easter eggs that you might have found in your Easter basket while you were looking?
Timeline graphics with T-cars. The graphic projected by the device held by the temporal agent tracks the flow of time. This graphic is nearly identical to the screen from the Voyager episode Relativity. In that episode, 709 was recruited by a future time-traveling version of Starfleet to stop a temporal incursion in the past. The type of interface on this screen is called T-cars, which stands for Temporal Computer Access Retrieval System. It is similar to the famous computer system LCARS, Library Computer Access and Retrieval System, invented for the next generation. And I may be this day old actually knowing now what the frick LCAR stood for. Someone may have said it way back in the day, but I'm not going to lie and say I remember it. Library Computer Access and Retrieval System. Kyle, did you know that's what LCAR stood for? We've heard LCARs all of our Star Trek lives. Did you know that?
I did not know that, but that is a goal of Union Federation to educate. So Lars, welcome. Well, Laz, welcome to our education section of Union
You
Federation.
can call me Lars. It's fine.
We don't have Haley here to science things up, so
I'm L Cars from now on.
LCAR. There we go. This is what happens when you go to a concert and don't get home till 2 a.m. Kirk's brother Sam. Lon, of course, knows Sam Kirk, or more accurately, George Samuel Kirk, because she worked with him on the Enterprise. The idea that Sam's full name was George Samuel Kirk was established in the original series, but this episode twists the classic show in one specific way. In this timeline, Sam has already died around 2259. In the TOS episode, Operation Annihilate, he dies later when the parasite kills him in 2267 on the planet Deneva. So we're getting wibbly wobbly, timey wimey already, Kevin.
I don't remember that.
Kevin, have you visited any institutes lately?
Noonien Singh Institute for Cultural Advancement. The genetic project that produces Khan is revealed here to have been a secret project in the early 21st century. This seems to contradict TOS canon that Khan came from the 1990s. Test tube baby, anyone?
You think this was done just kind of as a timeline sliding scale here, just to have it be more reflective of
Which
the
is
modern
weird,
time?
though, because didn't the Romulan spy say that this was supposed to happen in the 90s and I've been stuck here?
Yeah, I think you're right. She had been stuck there for a while. It was like 25 something years, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so like maybe it was supposed to happen there?
Yeah.
Lastly, we do have to talk about the Department of Temporal Investigations. At the very end, Lon is visited by a representative from the Department of Temporal Investigations. The department originates in the Deep Space Nine episode Trials and Tribulations, but it appears that Strange New Worlds is conflating this group with the same group of temporal agents that employed Daniels in Enterprise, but also with the Starfleet Temporal Integrity Commission, which was established in the Voyager episode Future's End and Relativity. As mentioned earlier, the graphics on this device in this episode seem to indicate this is the same group from Relativity, meaning they are probably operating out of the 29th century. Then again, this is a group all about time travel. Who knows where their home century might be?
The timey-wimey people. There you go. That was a funny scene in the Trials and Tribulations, because I remember those two people that were interviewing the cast had the names that were based off Mulder and Scully, but they changed them slightly, which I thought was funny.
Yeah.
Well, guys, it is time to engage that warp drive again, because it is going to be time to talk about the Ready Room. This, as hosted by Will Wheaton. This week's episode, Will was joined by Paul Wesley as he speaks with Will about stepping into the iconic role and traveling across time and space. Plus, they go behind the scenes of Strange New Worlds films as Strange New Worlds films on location in Toronto, and relive some Star Trek time travel episodes and much more. Guys, what did you learn this week from Strange New Worlds and his guest, Captain, one of the Captain Kirks himself, Paul Wesley? Kevin?
It was nice going down and looking at the past time travel episodes that they were brought up, which I thought was really neat. Like I said, the time travel episodes are some of my favorites in Star Trek in general. But I was kind of curious to how Paul Wesley was going to approach the character, and he did a good job discussing that he was not trying to do an imitation, but an interpretation. And that's the same way that I feel that Chris Pine did in the Kelvin timeline movies. And, knowing that this is a different Kirk as well, one that grew up in space, not in Iowa, is also a way to look at it as well. And so I liked his approach on that. I also liked how, he was first heard about the project, and how they, at the end of the Zoom session that he first had, he didn't know who. He finally figured out like the role that he was going to play. They were kind of like, bringing him through what they were looking at having him do, and then he finally figured out at the end. So I thought that was interesting.
Laz, what about you? Anything that you picked up extra out of the Ready Room?
I will piggyback on Kevin's statements because I think that encapsulates what I think his interview with the Ready Room was really about. It's, kind of a behind the scenes ish view on like how he was cast, his approach. But there's not much else to say. The only thing I'll comment on with the Ready Room, because I'm contrarian, is when they encapsulated yesterday's Enterprise, they did not show one shot of Tasha Yar, played by Denise Crosby, in that recap. And that's her episode.
What did? Yeah, you're right. What did they show? What was the clip they did show? I couldn't
They
remember.
showed like Picard like saying like this is a wall.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I was like, come on, like Whoopi Goldberg, like Tasha Yar, like let's go.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe you couldn't get the rights, but like Denise Crosby does a lot of stuff for Trek, so come on.
I love her.
Yeah, she's great. I don't think she gets enough respect for what she's done for Trek, but yeah, I love her. I'm just going to echo on what you guys say, and I also want to say I got to give a shout out to Will Wheaton. I've talked about this before, but it seems like ever since we got back from COVID and with Picard episode 3, he's just taken his interview skills to another level, and he seems like he's created an environment where the Trek cast feels really comfortable with him now and really talking openly and giving their thoughts and how they feel about things. And I think he's grown into a much more comfort level with himself with Trek through this. We know Will Wheaton's had kind of a rough past in dealing with his place in Star Trek through the years. And I think this show has helped Will Wheaton a lot as well, and him settling into understanding his history as part of Trek and coming to peace with that as well. But guys, before we get out of here too, we got to take a quick look into the Orb of Prophecy, thanks to a little bit of the Ready Room, as they gave us the exclusive clip from season 2, episode 4, Among the Lotus Eaters. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I got a phone call when this came up, and I didn't get a chance to revisit it because I had to walk out. So I'm going to ask you two, what did you think of what we saw in this clip? Kevin?
I'm trying to remember it, to be perfectly honest with you, because I didn't watch it. I've only seen the Ready Room once. And I just remember there was a tense standoff at the end there. But I'll be honest with you, I can't remember it. Part of me is kind of blocking it out intentionally, to be honest with you, because I don't want to spoil myself going into watching it next week. You know what I mean? Because I've been on the fence about actually watching these teasers. Because last week when they showed the teaser for this episode, you just see that beginning part where she encounters the guy from the timey-wimey guy who's dying there. And it gave up a lot, but it got me excited. This one was a little weird, so I didn't dive into it.
Laz, what about you?
So Kyle, you're in really bad company at the moment, because I also agree with Kevin. I actually have given up like watching most trailers or like anything, because I want to go into something without expectation or like knowing anything. And
what's funny? What's funny, Laz, is I used to be like a spoiler guy years ago, but the show that stopped me from doing that was 24, because you would watch the whole episode of 24 and then they would tease and give away so much in the next episode that when we used to group watch it with me and my friends, we would get together every week and watch 24. When it came to that spoiler end, we would stop and not watch it.
Well, I think part of that is like a larger discussion, which is, I think when you're an intuitive watcher of anything, you can pick up on like threads for where the story's going to go, even if it's a clip.
Yeah.
Because you've watched so many things, you've enjoyed it, you like love it, so you can pick up on those threads. So like nowadays, I'm like, nope. Like
I think showing a minute and a half clip is too much. It's just too much.
I think an aspect of that is especially when it's a show that we're enjoying so much, like Strange New Worlds. You know, if it was another Star Trek show, Discovery, and maybe not. not as heartbroken if I see that trailer for next week. But with this, because you're so excited and you want to come in as fresh as possible, you kind of tune that out. So I think it's actually a good point for that here. But there's a lot of other things that we're counting down to here with Star Trek. So obviously, we have Lower Deck season 4 coming out later this year. Discovery, the 5th and final season in 2024. We have the Starfleet Academy series that's been put to order. Who knows about that? We still Star Trek Legacy. There's talk, whatever it might end up being, if we actually see that. I want to ask you though, Laz, because there's one thing that is missing, and that is, of course, Prodigy season 2. And we had this conversation a little bit last week. You've had some really good posts on social media talking about Star Trek Prodigy season 2, and with an interesting perspective because you have had some work within the entertainment industry. So I just want to give you a quick chance here to express your thoughts on the cancellation of Star Trek Prodigy season 2.
Well, so typically when it comes to entertainment, because my first job out of college, 20 years ago, was doing key art for, films at that time, because TV wasn't like huge. And I've continued that throughout my career, going into advertising, marketing in different realms. So I have like a double-sided view on this. One side is that, cancellations and the way that we view that, it's not as simple as just like, we hate the fans, we hate this show, it's done. It's more about, the deals they've made, the talent. It's a lot of behind the scenes things that you don't like, that the normal, person doesn't consider. So like this has been going on, at least from what I've experienced, for at least 6 months. I can work on a poster for something. Like I said earlier, I worked on Picard. I did that a year and a half before it even like saw public. So like discussions and negotiations and all that stuff happens very slowly, let's say, because there's so many people involved. Outside of that, because I have opinions on that side, on the other side, as an artist and somebody who really loves and has empathy for the fans, I'm going to be doing something for like STLV this year, Star Trek Las Vegas, where I'm going to do like a free print for Prodigy. That way fans they just have something, a memento, whatever it might be. Like, I'm not making profit off of it, like, it's just for them. I did that for Discovery season 1 because I believe in just good people, good actions. If you can give back in any way, why not? So that's kind of my belief system. I can have opinions and strong opinions on one side and then just do good on the other side. So it's not as black and white, so to speak.
It's an interesting situation, and we've talked about this before. We talked about it a little last week, just the ever-changing landscape of how we get our entertainment and what's going on with it, and it's something that's morphing. And I think I think Star Trek really has become one of those shows and franchises that's really in the eye of the storm here, of kind of being caught in all these different directions things are going. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But
Well,
gentlemen, go ahead,
I
Les.
think I think something that's tough, and again, I remind anybody, these shows that we love and that we comment on, they have to be paid somehow, right? They have to be funded. So whether it be subscriptions to the things that you're, taking your subscriptions from in protest. I love protest, so do it up if you want to. But there are consequences, and just think through your kind of fan choices as you work through your feelings, because I have a lot of feelings, and I'm just throwing it out there. Hopefully somebody takes it to heart, because otherwise, like, we're not going to get much of anything if like Paramount's canceled.
This is true. Gentlemen, with that, it is time to get things wrapped up here. So let's head into our subspace signals. And of course, it all starts with finding the Union Federation, which you can find on the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel. If you're watching this video now, thank you. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, share it out. We're continuing to work to grow our wonderful YouTube channel. And of course, you can also hear the audio podcast versions of all of our shows on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com, or either there or on any of the great podcast catchers. I'll learn to talk at some point out there, including iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, so many great ones. And of course, you can contact us directly. You can email us at theunionfederation@gmail.com, or you can also visit our Facebook page for the Union Federation as well. We try to keep you updated on not only the happenings in Star Trek, but the Orville as well. And I know when Strange New Worlds wraps up, we're going to be looking at doing some Orville related stuff and kind of remind everybody of the greatness of the Orville, as we still are waiting word to see if a season 4 will happen. Kevin, I know we're keeping our fingers crossed around here. So, you can also find Union Federation on Twitter and Instagram at Union Federation Pod. And of course, too, you can also find the Union Federation on the BQN network as well. You can find the audio feed there. And of course, all of our great friends over at BQN, including Laz, and welcome to the family, Laz, from the Fandom Podcast Network side of things. And of course, you can find myself, Kyle, on social media and Twitter at AKyleW, or on Instagram at AKyleFandom. Kevin, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix.
And Laz, where can people find not only you, but the amazing artwork you do? Because I've seen some of it online and it's quite impressive, my friend.
Thank you very much. You can find me at Laz Marques, LazMarquez, on Twitter and Instagram, as well as www.lazmarquez.com.
Nice.
Right. Of course, too, you can find Haley on Twitter at Trekkie01D, or Amy at Miss Amy Nelson. And of course, visit the BQN Facebook page as well and get absorbed into their collective. It's been a fun time, guys, and it's been great having you on, Laz. Thank you so much, Kevin. As always, it's great to have you on with the crew. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, hailing frequencies are now closed.